Welcome, traveler, to the sanctuary of Asclepius, a place of rest and healing. The sanctuary of Asclepius is an amazing place, even for those with only a passing interest in medicine. It was a fascinating location, combining the mystical, religious, and scientific. And if someone happened to pass out, they'd luckily be surrounded by skilled physicians. This is the sanctuary of Asclepius, the god of medicine. It was here that the sick and weary came, seeking cures for their ailments. Sometimes the medical practitioners provided the cures, and sometimes the healing came from the gods themselves. This tour will help explain the inner workings of the sanctuary, as well as the unique way the Greeks approached medicine. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The ill and infirm came to this sanctuary to pray and offer sacrifices to Asclepius, the god of medicine. According to myth, Asclepius was once a mortal physician who eventually became a god. He had many sanctuaries across Greece, but the most famous was in Epidaurus. When pilgrims passed through the entrance of the sanctuary, they could read this inscription: "When you enter the abode of the god which smells of incense, you must be pure, and thought is pure when you think with piety." Medical steles constituted a sort of hub between medicine, religion, and the divine. They were slabs with inscriptions that praised Asclepius's virtues and merit, and described his methods of healing. The inscriptions relayed the dreams patients had within the abaton, one of the most important buildings in the sanctuary. The steles outlined the patient's name, their disease, and how they were cured by Asclepius. They were probably written by the sanctuary's priests, or at least under the priest's supervision. Asclepius was a complex deity. In addition to being a god, he was also a trained physician and disciple of the centaur Chiron. In ancient Greece, religion was inseparable from rites, processions, and sacrifices. This was no different in Epidaurus, and visitors to Asclepius's sanctuary needed to prepare themselves accordingly. Pilgrims cleaned themselves in order to be pure, then offered Asclepius food like honey cakes, cheesecakes, baked meats, and figs. The food was placed on the sanctuary's holy table, where it was presumably later taken by priests. After the preliminary offerings, visitors were allowed to enter the abaton, where they would hopefully encounter Asclepius in a dream. Medical steles also mention that healed patients sometimes gave additional offerings to Asclepius as thanks for being cured. Asclepius was originally born a mortal, and was the product of an affair between the god Apollo and a mortal, Coronis. Apollo killed Coronis after discovering she had been unfaithful, and ordered her body burned on a funeral pyre. However, he rescued his unborn child from Coronis's womb before the fire consumed her body. Apollo gave the baby to the centaur Chiron, who raised Asclepius and taught him to practice medicine. Over time, Asclepius became so skilled in the art of healing, he could even raise the dead. This angered Zeus, who sent Asclepius to Hades with a thunderbolt. Apollo retaliated by killing the Cyclopes responsible for making Zeus's thunderbolts. Then, Zeus revived Asclepius, making him immortal and deifying him in the process. In sculptures, pottery, mosaics, and coins, Asclepius was portrayed holding a staff intertwined with a sacred snake. The staff is a symbol of medicine that still endures to this day. The Epidaurus was the priest's residence. As the link between patients and the gods, priests were essential to the operation of the sanctuary. They were often elected into the priesthood for one-year periods, but could also buy themselves a position if they were wealthy enough. In addition to interpreting patients' dreams in the abaton, priests both supervised and performed sacrifices and rituals. During these functions, they were usually clad in white. The abaton was built in the northern boundary of the sanctuary, where it surrounded a sacred well whose water was believed to have therapeutic properties. The abaton was where pilgrims went for incubation, or dream rituals. Details of the incubation ritual have been described in unearthed medical steles. They were also noted in Aristophanes' play Plutus, which featured a more comedic view of the process. Incubation was the dream ritual pilgrims experienced in the Abaton. After completing the necessary preliminary rituals, pilgrims were allowed to enter the sacred building, where they lay prone. As they took in the smell of burning incense, the sanctuary's priests extinguished the oil lamps and asked them to sleep in silence. Once they were asleep, Asclepius would appear in their dreams and give his medical advice. The advice included diet and treatment recommendations, as well as requests for specific offerings or religious rituals. Upon waking up, priests interpreted the patient's dreams, unless a patient had been miraculously healed in their sleep. However, if a patient was completely beyond help, they were removed from the Abaton. This was to adhere to a ritual law that stated that no one could die or be born within the building.
I see you've completed the tour. I hope you enjoyed your time in the sanctuary. As you can see, gods and miracles were just as important to the healing process as medicine was. Now, what else would you like to do? Excellent. Here is your first question. Which mythical creatures made Zeus's thunderbolts? Correct. Zeus's thunderbolts were crafted by Cyclops. On to the second question. What was the name of the building where incubation occurred? Yes, pilgrims entered the Abaddon to undergo a dream ritual in the hopes of curing their ailments. One final question for you. Who was Asclepius' father? Yes, Apollo was Asclepius' father, and his mother was a mortal named Coronis. You've proven you know the sanctuary inside and out. Well done. Very well. May your quest for knowledge be fruitful and fulfilling.
Welcome to Athens, Wanderer. More specifically, welcome to the musical hub of the city, the Odeon. The Odeon was where musicians came to share their songs with the public. The melodies played here caught the wind and drifted through the air, soothing the souls of Athenians across the city. Come find me when your visit is complete, and we will talk about the things you've learned. See you soon, Wanderer.
Music played an important part in almost every aspect of ancient Greek life. Whether attending a public gathering, rubbing elbows at a dinner party, laying out offerings in a temple, or marching into battle, there was a song for everything. Aristotle even wrote that music increased the efficiency of laborers, and it was often played for rowers and field pickers to keep them working at a steady rhythm. Musical contests, or agones, were originally only held during religious festivals. Over time, they became cultural events in their own right, and attracted musicians and spectators from all over the Greek world. For example, the Athenian Panathenaea festival featured competitions for instrument playing and poetry recitation. The Dionysia festival included contests between groups of male singers to see who could best perform a dithyramb, a merry hymn in honor of the god Dionysus. While these contests could be attended by all, women weren't allowed to compete in them. In the early days of the competitions, winners only received a crown and an ego boost for their talents. But from the Hellenistic period onward, the rewards were upgraded to cash prizes. These prizes were large enough for musicians to make a fortune, especially if they moved from festival to festival. The Odeon of Pericles was built sometime between the 440s and 430s BCE. The building was commissioned by Pericles for use in the Panathenaea festival. The Odeon was also a venue for poetry readings, political rallies, and philosophical performances. According to ancient sources, the original design of the Odeon was inspired by the tent of the Persian king Xerxes, a spoil of war the Athenians salvaged after their decisive victory at Salamis in 480 BCE. The building's roof was made of timber from captured Persian ships. In this sense, the Odeon was both a triumphant symbol of Athens and an insult to their Persian enemies. This structure was considered one of the grandest architectural accomplishments of ancient Athens. In ancient Greece, there was a type of music for almost any occasion. Complicated songs like hymns, paeans, and dithyrambs were meant for the ears of the gods, and as such were usually played during religious ceremonies and civic life. Meanwhile, a hymneus was a song performed at weddings, and a threnody accompanied funeral processions. For more merry occasions like symposia, scholia were the soundtrack of choice. However, drama was considered the epitome of artistic expression, since it combined songs with poetry, dance, acting, and costumes. Plays were thought to be the connection between mortals and gods, and the songs that accompanied them, especially those from the tragedies of Euripides, often became huge hits in the rest of Greece.
Hello again. I trust your visit was worthwhile, and that learning of music was a feast for your mind. I know it was for mine. Is there anything else you'd like to do? Fancy yourself an expert on music? Then let's put your knowledge to the test. Which of the following songs was played at weddings? A paean was a hymn to the gods. It was not sung at weddings. Keep trying. It's true that the dithyrambi were on the merrier side, but they were sung in honor of Dionysus, not newlyweds. Try again. Correct. A hymeneos was performed at weddings to wish the couple a happy and prosperous union. Let's move on to the second question. The Odeon of Pericles was modeled after spoils of war from which Athenian enemy? Correct. Not only was the design based on the tent of the Persian king Xerxes, but the building's roof was made of wood from captured Persian ships. Only one question remains. According to Aristotle, music was especially important to which group of people? You are correct. Aristotle believed music improved certain motor skills, so it was played for field pickers and rowers to increase their work output. You definitely have an ear for music, Wanderer. I applaud you. Farewell, Wanderer. I hope you enjoyed the sweet sounds of the Odeon. Welcome, Wanderer, to one of the most prestigious places in Greece, the theater. The theater was where audiences gathered to watch plays. They were the highest form of art in Greece, and people saw theater as a symbol of complete harmony between the mortal world and the divine. When you're done taking in the sights and sounds, come see me, and we'll talk more. Until then, Wanderer.
Theater is not just part of geek culture, but was a major part of Greek culture. In Athens, comedies and dramas originated from the dancing and singing performed by members of the cult of Dionysus. Between 536 and 533 BCE, theater's burgeoning importance in Athens was demonstrated when the responsibility of organizing tragedies was entrusted to the archon, the highest-ranking magistrate in the city. From then on, theater grew rapidly in popularity, and soon a permanent space for performing and watching plays was built on the slope of the Acropolis. During the 5th century BCE, theater became intertwined with Athens' democracy. It often functioned as an echo chamber for political ideas, and in some cases, it could even influence public opinion. As a result, in the 4th century BCE, Plato coined the term theaterocracy to describe his city's politics. Theatrical competitions were held in the sanctuary of Dionysus Eleutherius, god of wine and patron of drama. Dionysus was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Semele. Stories say that Zeus, who had fallen in love with Semele, appeared to her holding a lightning bolt in his hand. Semele was tragically struck dead by the lightning, but Zeus managed to save her unborn child, keeping the embryo in his thigh until it fully gestated. This is why the name Dionysus is sometimes thought to mean born twice. In Athens, theater was a part of the cult of Dionysus, and stage productions in the god's honor were held during festivals like the Linnaea and the Great Dionysia. In Athens, there were 3 festivals that honored Dionysus with drama performances: the rustic Dionysias, the Linnaea, and the Great Dionysia. For the rustic Dionysia, each deme of Attica organized their own Dionysiac procession. The parades were full of phallic songs, dances, and symbols meant to signify fertility, and participants wore drunkard masks and sang bawdy lyrics about the god. The Linnaea was the oldest Dionysian festival. It was exclusively reserved for Greek citizens and mostly made up of comedy performances. Finally, the Great Dionysia was the most important festival. Taking place over several days, it began with a parade called a phallophori, followed by a dithyramb contest, and ending with consecrated drama competitions. The Great Dionysia was supervised by the head magistrate known as the Archon, who was assisted by 12 other magistrates. Among his duties, the Archon picked Perioikoi, rich Athenian citizens responsible for providing the budget for rehearsals and performances. 2 days before the Dionysia, a ceremony called the Proagon took place where playwrights introduced their work. The Dionysia finally began in earnest with a procession to the god's temple, followed by sacrifices and a symposium. The next 2 days centered on dithyramb contests, while the final 4 days were dedicated to drama competitions. The contests' outcomes were decided by 10 judges who were appointed at random by the Archon. The judges placed their votes in an urn, and 5 of the votes were randomly picked to determine the winner. All Athenian stage actors were male, regardless of whether they were playing men or women. Tragedies originally featured only 1 actor performing alongside a chorus, eventually reaching a maximum of 4. Adding more roles opened up the opportunity for dramatic dialogue. During performances, they prepared themselves in the skene, a building that served as a backstage area, before emerging onto the proskenion, or stage. The skene could be painted to represent backdrops like palaces, temples, and tombs. Its roof was reserved for appearances by the gods. These gods could be moved around with a crane called a mechane, which produced spectacular visual effects. On stage, actors wore masks and elaborate costumes. For tragedies, they were adorned with magnificent clothes. While for comedies, actors playing male characters wore hugely exaggerated phalluses, probably to maximize the laughs. The centerpiece of the theater was the orchestra, or dancing place. It was a large, circular area that hosted choral performances, religious rites, and, presumably, acting. Choruses were composed of men wearing masks and costumes. Any Athenian citizen could be choritai, as long as they were selected by the chorus director. Chorus members also served as the equivalent of a curtain, as their entrance and exit marked the beginning and end of the play. New costumes and masks were produced for the chorus for every new play, and they were often just as impressive and elaborate as the performances. For example, Aristophanes' comedies feature the chorus dressing as wasps, frogs, birds, clouds, and islands. One of his plays, The Knights, even had men riding other men dressed as horses. Athens' Theatron, or performance space, could seat up to 17,000 people, nearly a tenth of the population of Attica. Its excellent acoustics made it ideal for drama, but it was also sometimes used for political meetings and parades. The theater was accessible to everybody. This did not mean that seating was free, though. The first rows were normally where priests and public officials sat. while the central part of the auditorium was reserved for ambassadors and guests of honor. There is also evidence that men and women sat separately. In general, theater audiences were emotional and noisy. During performances, they would shout, curse, and throw things depending on their mood, and their reactions were just as much a part of the experience as the acting.
Hello again, Wanderer. I hope your visit was entertaining. Though all art forms were important in Greek culture, none had the same prestige as theater, which provided a unique experience with every performance. Is there anything else you'd like to do? Really? Then let's begin. Who was Dionysus' mother? Correct! Unfortunately, Semele died before her son was born, but Zeus saved the unborn baby and raised him as a god. Next, another question. Which competitions took place on the second and third days of the Great Dionysia? Yes, the Theramvi were hymns dedicated to Dionysus, and the Thyrambos contests were held on the second and third days of the festival. And finally, the last question. Which of the following is the oldest festival dedicated to Dionysus? The Great Dionysia was one of the largest festivals dedicated to the god, but not the oldest. Try a different answer. You are correct. The Linnea was the oldest Dionysiac festival. Congratulations, Wanderer. You're a very studious theater goer. Then I will leave you be. Farewell, Wanderer.
Hello, my friend! It is my pleasure to introduce you to Corinth's Temple of Aphrodite. It really is a lovely sight, isn't it? The temple, that is, not the ladies. Although they are also lovely. Lovely and lively and, I'm sorry, what were we talking about? In Greece, many love stories were told about the gods. How romantic! Sometimes they were heartwarming and happy, but they often ended in tears, tragedy, and a whole brood of illegitimate children. I'm looking at you, Zeus! Anyway, this tour will introduce you to some of these divine love stories, which may give you perspective on how the Greeks approached love in their own lives. Enjoy your visit, my friend! I'll come see you again when you finish the tour.
Much like Athens, Corinth had its own Acropolis, called the Acrocorinth. The natural promontory provided an excellent view of the surrounding territory. It was also the home of several sanctuaries, allegedly constructed in the 6th century BCE. The Acrocorinth's most famous attraction was the Temple of Aphrodite. Pausanias describes it as having statues of Aphrodite, her son Eros, and the sun god Helios. According to Strabo, the temple's most distinguishing feature was its servants, who acted as sacred prostitutes. However, Strabo is the only source for this information, and it is still hotly debated to this day. Love played a large role in countless mythological stories. Zeus himself was not immune to the feeling, and fell for both mortals and other deities. Some myths centered on forbidden feelings that led to tragedy, such as Phaedra's love for her stepson Hippolytus. While marriage was prominent in mythology, it was usually presented as problematic. For example, Aphrodite frequently cheated on her husband Hephaestus, and Medea's resentment against her ex-husband Jason eventually drove her mad enough to murder her children. These less-than-ideal depictions reflected the Greeks' idea of marriage, which they viewed as a civic duty instead of a romantic union. The goddess Aphrodite was one of the mightiest Olympians, and was typically associated with love, beauty, and sex. She was worshipped all across the ancient Mediterranean by men and women, both young and old. Her origins differ depending on the version of the story. The poet Hesiod says that she was born from the severed genitals of Uranus, while Homer's version of the myth names her as the daughter of Zeus and Dione. Aphrodite appeared regularly in mythological stories and had many mortal lovers. Her favorite was Adonis, a beautiful boy who died tragically in a hunting accident. Aphrodite was devastated by his death, so she created a cult called the Adonia to commemorate him.
My friend, good to see you again. I bet you were surprised by some of the stories you heard. For a bunch of immortal beings, the gods certainly were saucy, eh? Tell me if there's anything else I can do for you. Is that so, my friend? Then let's get started. Which poet said that Aphrodite was the daughter of Zeus and Dione? Hesiodos' version of this story said Aphrodite was the product of Uranos' chopped olives, so to speak. So, no. Yes, it was Homer who said Aphrodite was a child of Zeus. On to the next question. Medea was married to which legendary hero? Yes, Medea was married to Iason, but after he left her for someone else, she resented him so much she murdered their children. But let's not talk about such depressing things. Instead, you can answer this last question. What was the name of Corinth's Acropolis? Correct! The Corinth has been home to many sanctuaries, as well as the famous Temple of Aphrodite. You passed the test! Congratulations, my intelligent friend! Normally, I don't let people go until they buy a souvenir, but for you, my friend, I'll make an exception!
Welcome to Laconia, visitor. You're here to learn about Spartan society, yes? Then I won't stop you. Sparta is a glorious place, and you should feel honored to be here. Honored, and perhaps somewhat frightened. Sparta had a unique hierarchy, especially compared to the rest of Greece. Everyone had their place, and you will soon learn what those places were. I will find you again once your visit has ended. Until then, visitor.
Spartan society was structured around austerity, self-sufficiency, and a hostility towards foreign elements. It was divided into 3 social classes: citizens, Perioikoi, and Helots. Citizens were called Spartans, or homoioi. They were free men and women with mostly equal rights and wealth, though their contributions to political life were extremely limited. The Perioikoi lived in surrounding areas under Spartan control. They cultivated the land and were primarily merchants and craftsmen. They were also part of the army, and their lands were the first line of defense in the event of a hostile attack. Helots were Sparta's lowest class. They were people who had lost their freedom to the Spartans, and they served the city as slaves. Helots were considered property instead of people. As a result, they had no political or civil rights. Helots made up the majority of Sparta's population. According to Polydeuces, they lingered between slavery and freedom. 2 elements made Helots differ from other slaves. They were allowed to form their own families, and they were publicly owned by the city of Sparta instead of private citizens. Because Helots were deemed public property, they could not be sold as merchandise. They mostly worked to cultivate the land, but also fought in wars alongside the Spartans. While they gave the fruits of their labor to Sparta, they also kept a fair part of it for themselves. This practice allowed some Helots to make enough money to buy their own freedom. Alternatively, if a Helot served the state well enough in military campaigns, they could also be granted civil rights. The founding of Sparta is dated around the 9th century BCE. Historical information about the city is limited, but it was known to extend into the region of Laconia. Over time, Sparta started encroaching on the territory of Messenia, eventually leading to war. Sparta gained more land in this conflict, which they divided between their citizens and the Perioikoi. The aftermath of the Second Messenian War, from 640 to 620 BCE, then divided the population into 3 groups: the homoioi, the Perioikoi, and the Helots. The Helots of Laconia mostly respected Sparta's rule and did not cause much trouble. However, Helots from Messenia supposedly resisted the Spartans, although sources can only confirm one revolt for certain, which occurred in Messenia in 464 BCE. During the 5th century BCE, Helots were quite active in the army, especially during the Peloponnesian War. They served as hoplites on land and as rowers during naval battles. In both cases, they gave Sparta an important numerical advantage. For every Spartan on the battlefield, there were at least 7 Helots. Although many ancient sources say Spartans had a hostile relationship with Helots, they were much more likely to treat them better in times of war. For example, when 300 Helots and 120 elite Spartans were captured by Athens during the Battle of Sphacteria in 425 BCE, the Spartans promised the Helots their freedom if they served them well in combat. Similarly, around the same time, the Spartan general Brasidas fought a battle alongside 700 Helots. Impressed by their courage and loyalty, Brasidas later freed them all and allowed them to join the Perioikoi. Perioikoi were another group of Sparta's population. They lived not in the city itself, but in its surrounding areas. The Perioikoi were never hostile against the Spartans. In fact, both groups together were known by the collective name Lacedaemonians. Perioikic cities had their own autonomy and sanctuaries, but they were always bound to Sparta. They were allowed to develop their own local laws and economies, but could never reach a level of prosperity that rivaled their parent state.
I see you've finished. I hope you have a better appreciation for Spartan society. Nothing we do is without reason, and every man, woman, and child has a role to play. What would you like to do? Is that so? Then let us begin. During which battle were Helots promised their freedom? Yes, in the Battle of Sphacteria, a group of elite Spartans promised to free their accompanying Helots if they helped the Spartans during a siege. Next question. Which of the following is another name for Spartan citizens? Spartan citizens were also called Omi, which meant equals. One final question. Which Spartan general freed 700 Helots? Correct. Brasidas freed 700 Helots as a reward for their exemplary military service. You passed. I'm impressed. Then you may leave. Farewell, visitor. Greetings, visitor. You stand in Sparta's political center, where all of the city's most important decisions were made. You should feel honored. Spartans may be unequaled on the battlefield, but some situations are better solved by a meeting of minds than a clash of swords. Not many, mind you, but some. Sparta's political system was unique in the Greek world. While Athenians wasted hours on end whining and wagging their tongues at each other, Spartan kings made their decisions swiftly and deliberately. They preferred action over words. Come find me again when you finish your visit. We will speak more then. Farewell.
Sparta's political system differed from most of Greece's. One of its most distinctive features was that it was ruled by 2 kings. These kings belonged to 2 separate dynasties, the Eurypontids and the Aegeads, both of which were said to be descended from Heracles. Both kings shared equal powers, and disputes between them required the intervention of special magistrates known as Ephors. However, if one of the kings were more charismatic or experienced, they could influence the weaker king's choices. Spartan kings had several responsibilities and functions. As lifetime magistrates, they were technically Sparta's priests and strategists, and their duties encompassed everything from politics to justice. Originally, both kings would lead military campaigns in times of war. However, from 507 BCE onwards, only one of the two kings could be head of the army. On the battlefield, kings were accompanied by 300 elite soldiers for protection. But being a king wasn't only about working and fighting, they enjoyed special privileges as well. Spartan kings lived at the expense of the city, owned royal estates in the surrounding Perioikoi cities, and received the majority of the spoils of war. When they passed away, they were buried with special honors, and the population mourned them for a period of 10 days. The kings of Sparta enjoyed many important religious honors. They were in charge of sacrifices, both during military campaigns and at home. The kings received double portions of the meat at all communal meals, and they were also the first to pour libations. They also personally conducted public sacrifices as priests, which helped remind their subjects of their divine connection to Heracles and Zeus. The Ephors, or overseers, were 5 magistrates elected by the Spartan assembly. They were chosen from amongst Spartan citizens over 30 and served for 1 year with no possibility of re-election. The Ephors played a large part in administrating the city and were considered the most democratic agents in the Spartan political system. They had judicial power and ordered the dispatching of the Spartan army during wars. They also met and negotiated with representatives from other states, in addition to running the agoge, the Spartan education system. While not as powerful as the two kings, the Ephors still held great sway over Sparta's affairs. The Gerousia was the Spartan Council of Elders. It was made up of the 2 current kings, as well as 28 elders called Gerontes. They were Spartan citizens over the age of 60, the cutoff age for military duty. They were elected for life by the Spartan Assembly. The Gerousia, similar to Athens' Boulé, handled legislative and financial matters. It could submit bills and motions to the Assembly, and could also cancel Assembly decisions with the power of veto. To ensure that the right of veto did not weaken the Assembly, Ephors were introduced to keep the Gerousia in check and maintain a steady balance of power. This allowed Sparta to include more just elements in its political system. The Spartan Assembly, or the Apella, was made up of Spartan citizens who were over 30 years old. Its exact meeting place remains unknown, but it was presided over by a special member of the Ephors called the eponymous Ephor. The Apella had limited authority, since any decision it made could be overruled by the Gerousia. But thanks to the efforts of the Ephors, it still played an important role in Spartan society. The Apella dealt with topics like foreign affairs, war declarations, peace negotiations, and more. They also elected Ephors and Gerousia members, and could both grant political rights to foreigners and remove them from Spartan citizens. Unlike the myriad sources on the functions of the Athenian Assembly, the exact details of the Apella's decision-making process are unknown.
I see you finished. I hope you feel more knowledgeable about the inner workings of Spartan politics. Our way of ruling was not conventional, to say the least. But it served our purposes well. What would you like to do? Are you? We shall see. Let's begin. What was the name of the Spartan Assembly? Correct. The Spartan Assembly was known as the Apella. Question 2. How many members did the Gerousia have? No. Although we Spartans did love that number. Try a different answer. Yes. The Gerousia consisted of 28 Gerondas and the 2 kings of Sparta. Last question. What was the name of the Spartan education program? Correct. Our rigorous education program was called the Agogoi, and it was overseen by the Ephors. You've done well, Visitor. Very well. Farewell, Visitor. May your travels be safe and carefree.
Welcome to the Gymnasium of the Kinosaries, one of the many places where philosophers came to enrich the mind and enlighten the spirit. There is no better setting for learning than in a quiet place far away from the commotion of the city. Education held a very important place in Greek society. The most prominent educators were philosophers, whose teachings ranged from everyday rituals to the makeup of the universe. Once your tour is complete, come find me, and we can discuss what you've learned. Farewell for now, wanderer. Enjoy your visit. I will see.
Philosophy comes from the Greek word philosophia, or love of wisdom. This concept was in direct contrast with philochromatia, love of money, and philotimia, love of honor. As of the second half of the 5th century BCE, Athens was known as Greece's capital of philosophy. Due to the rise of democracy, there was an increasing need for education beyond the basic subjects of elementary school. Athenian citizens needed to be able to participate in various functions of the democratic state, such as being elected for office, proposing new laws, engaging in military decisions, or simply defending their rights. Originally, Athens had no official school buildings for higher education. Sophists and philosophers taught either in private homes or in public spaces like the theater. To recruit young pupils for long-term curricula, they also held classes in gymnasia, where young Athenians underwent physical training. The Cynosarges was a sanctuary to Heracles, located in the south suburb of Athens. At the beginning of the 4th century BCE, Antisthenes used this sanctuary as a teaching spot for his school of philosophy, the aptly named Cynicism. Any free citizen was allowed to involve themselves in the Athenian democratic process. However, to truly influence the flow of politics, their speech and rhetoric skills had to be impeccable. As a result, many sophists taught subjects like logic, reason, and eloquence. These were meant to help students achieve arete, or excellence. But this specific concept of excellence was often challenged, especially by other philosophers. For example, Plato, Socrates, and Isocrates preferred a more moral approach and argued that rhetoric should be used as a means to serve the greater good. Socrates and Plato went even further, declaring that philosophy and wisdom were not only useful tools, but also ethical virtues. Ancient Greek philosophy was multidisciplinary in nature. In addition to wisdom and logic, philosophers also studied and taught math, geometry, music theory, and even medicine. For example, the philosopher Pericles wrote a treatise called On Human Nature, where he outlined various explanations on human physiology. Philosophy's influence was also great enough to affect medicine. Hippocratic physicians were known to incorporate philosophical ideas into their work, and the treatise On Airs seems to be influenced by pre-Socratic theories on air being the first principle of the universe. The famed philosopher Socrates had an ambiguous relationship with sophists. In Plato's dialogues, Socrates is portrayed as being in constant opposition with the famous sophists of his time. Aristophanes' comedy, The Clouds, meanwhile, depicts Socrates as a sophist himself, constantly demanding payment for his teachings. Socrates was in fact very poor and made no money off his teachings. He also differed from the sophists in that while they only taught aristocratic youths, Socrates taught everyone, regardless of station. Unfortunately, his controversial ideas and practices did not sit well with the city of Athens, and he was eventually tried for impiety. Philosophy was not only a collection of ideas, but a way of life. According to philosopher Pierre Hadot, his ancient counterparts had a daily regime of spiritual exercises to combat their passions, doubts, and illusory beliefs. These exercises included meditation on death, contemplation of nature, or speaking with a friend or mentor. Philosophers also followed specific dress codes and diets. They were also part of a community of masters and students. These communities were created and strengthened in schools. Plato founded such a school in the early 4th century BCE, when he purchased a property in a grove just outside of Athens. The school was designed to groom students into philosopher citizens who could eventually rule the city in a measured and fair manner. It followed its own rules and was open to both male and female disciples.
I can tell by the crease in your brow that you're already puzzling over the new things you've learned. Don't be embarrassed. Even the wisest among us need to ask questions before they search for answers. Is there anything else you'd like to do? You wish to test your wisdom? Very well. Let's see how you compare to the great philosophers. The first question is an easy one. What does philosophia mean? Correct. Philosophia referred to the love of wisdom. Time for the next question. The Kynosarges was a sanctuary dedicated to which Greek hero? I'm afraid the Kynosarges was not a sanctuary to Odysseus. Keep trying. Theseus was a legendary Greek hero whose achievements include such amazing feats as slaying the Minotaur. But the Kynosarges was not one of his sanctuaries. Try a different answer. Correct. It was the mighty Heracles. Now, for the last question. Which play by Aristophanes portrayed Socrates as a sophist? Yes, The Clouds was a comedy that portrayed the famous philosopher as a greedy sophist. Plato even believed that this caricature contributed to his mentor's eventual trial and execution. Well done, Wanderer. Even Socrates would be impressed by the depths of your wisdom. As you wish, Wanderer. Safe travels.
Πού καλυτές τούτο εστί?